The primary enemy of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, a fantasy television series premiering in 2022, is Sauron. He was once Maya, but he fell and became Morgoth's loyal servant. Sauron succeeded Morgoth as the Dark Lord and gained charge of his army after Morgoth's destruction. Sauron took on the form of Halbrand and pretended to be the forgotten heir of the Southlands many years later in the Second Age of Middle-earth. Eventually, on her voyage, he would encounter the elf known as Galadriel and become her ally with the intention of making her his queen so that they may rule Middle-earth together. He then assumed the identity of Anatar and gained Celebrimbor's trust in the process. Origin of Sauron. Myron was Sauron's real name at first. As the strongest Maya of the Vala All the Smith, he gained a vast deal of knowledge about smithing and handicrafts from all, which helped him become a master artisan and mighty in the lore of all S people. 2. He was one of the strongest Maer. Myron was good and trustworthy in the days before days, just as Eru had made him to be. His admiration for perfection and order, as well as his distaste for waste, were his greatest virtues. This would also turn out to be the reason for his demise, though, since Myron recognized in Melkor the strength and determination that would enable him to accomplish his goals more quickly than if he pursued them on his own. But Meren's goal was to subjugate the brains and wills of Middle-earth's creatures for what he believed to be their own gain, whereas Melkor sought to either conquer or destroy the continent itself. Myron wanted to strengthen his natural ability to carry out his amazing plans, but eventually this became a goal unto itself. As a result, he allied with Melkor and quickly rose to the position of chief agent. Myron remained ostentatiously faithful to the Vala after joining forces with Melkor, but he discreetly told his master of his interactions with them. Myron moved out of Valinor and publicly pledged his allegiance to Melkor after he established his strongholds in Middle-earth. Making him an acknowledged enemy of the Vala, as Melkor's lieutenant, Sauron commanded the fortress of Angband. It was with Sauron's aid that Melkor was able to breed orcs, in mockery of the children of Iluvatar. At the beginning of the Battle of the Powers, Sauron feigned a resistance against the Vala at Angband, thus allowing Melkor to muster forces at Utumno unnoticed. After both Angband and Utumno were sacked and Melkor captured, Sauron was not found. In their haste to both capture the Dark Lord and remove him from Middle-earth, the Vala overlooked Sauron's escape. Sauron controlled things. In Melkor's absence, Angband's reconstruction began, and the orcs there multiplied under his command. Possibly aware of the Great March, Sauron may have harried the elves on their journey, directing Melkor's servants abroad or affecting the weather. The Sindar elves in Beleriand called him Gorthor, meaning dread abomination, while others of the Eldar had named him Sauron, meaning the abhorred or the abominable, a mockery of his original name. Under Sauron's regency, Angband was almost ready by YT 1495, with orc armies already prepared by him when Morgoth, Melkor, returned. Towards the end of the First Age, the Noldor elves left the blessed realm of Valinor in the utter west, against the council of the Vala, in order to wage war on Morgoth following his theft of the Silmarils of Fëanor. Enchanted gems that glowed with light from the now-destroyed trees of Valinor. In that war, Sauron was counted as the greatest of Morgoth's servants that have names, and was soon feared as a lord of phantoms and dreadful beasts, a shapeshifter and sorcerer. When Morgoth left Angband much later to corrupt the newly awakened Atani men, Sauron directed the war against the elves. Commanding a host of Balrogs, by one account, he seized the elvish isle of Tol Sur Ion from its warden, Orodreth, and turned it into Tolin Gorhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. There he established himself as the Lord of Werewolves, with both Drogluin, sire of the werewolves, and Thuringwethel, a vampire herald. At his side, after the Dager Bragalak in FA 456, Sauron was bidden by Morgoth to destroy Barahir, ally of Finrod, king of Nargothrond. Sauron ensnared Gorlim, who was captured by his hunters, and interrogated him about the outlaw lord's location. Gorlim refused to tell them anything, even under torture, until Sauron himself came forth and bartered with the man. Gorlim asked for his wife Eilunel, whom he thought captured. Thus, Sauron agreed and Gorlim yielded the information. However, Morgoth's agent then revealed that Eilunel was dead, and he put Gorlim to death afterward. Sauron then sent Gorgol the Butcher's horde to slay Barahir and his company. Barahir's son, Beren, evaded this fate, and after news of his deeds reached Morgoth, Sauron at the helm of an army of orcs, werewolves and other fell beasts started hunting him. In the quest for the Silmaril, Beren and Finrod were captured by Sauron when they tried to sneak past Tolin Gargith in orc disguises. Sauron then defeated Finrod in a duel with songs of power, as told in the Lay of Lethien. Stripping them of their stolen garb, he cast them into the dungeons where werewolves devoured their companions. Morgoth's vassal hoped to terrify them into revealing their quest. When one of Sauron's werewolves came to attack Beren, Finrod wrestled with and killed it, but died soon after of his injuries. Soon afterward, Luthien and Huan the Wolfhound arrived at the bridge of Tolin Gorhoth. Sauron sent his servants to capture Luthien, but all were slain by Huan, including Draugluin, but he fled and told his master that Huan was there. Sauron was aware of the prophecy that stated that Huan could not be slain save by the greatest wolf that had ever lived. As such, Sauron took the form of a werewolf and resolved to kill Huan and capture Luthien. His form was so monstrous that as he charged down the bridge even Huan was forced to spring aside. But Luthien possessed the ability to cast spells of sleep, and had one such spell active upon her at the time. Sauron was momentarily impacted by the spell as he lunged to attack her, and Huan took advantage of this brief distraction to leap upon Sauron. In the end Huan took Sauron by the throat and subdued him, and though Sauron attempted to shape-shift into a serpent and escape, Huan's grip upon his throat was too strong. Luthien demanded then that Sauron yield to her the tower and the isle. She knew that Huan could not kill Sauron, as a Maya he was immortal. But she knew as well that Sauron had built up a great deal of power in his corporeal form, and Huan could destroy that. She then mocked him with the possibility of having to flee back to Angband without his body to endure the scorn of Morgoth. Ultimately, Sauron chose to surrender Tolin Gorhoth to her. Huan released him and he fled in the form of a vampire. After his defeat by Luthien, Sauron played little part in the events of the First Age. After his former master was defeated and taken to Valinor in chains, Sauron seemed to repent and plead Eowyn and the victorious host of the West for mercy, although he may have only been daunted by their triumph. However, Eowyn did not have the authority to pardon a being of his own order, and commanded Sauron to return to Amon to be judged by the Vala. Sauron's pride and fear ultimately won, and instead of truly repenting and returning to Valinor, he fled and hid somewhere in Middle-earth. Second Age. After remaining hidden and dormant for 5 centuries, Sauron began revealing himself once more, and by South Australia 1000 had gathered power and established himself in the land of Mordor, in eastern Middle-earth, and began building the dreaded Barad-dûr near Mount Doom. He gathered under his government of orcs, trolls, and other creatures from the days of Morgoth, and Sauron corrupted certain peoples of men such as the Easterlings and Haradrim with delusions of power and wealth. His passion for order had led him to desire to become a god-king, wielding absolute temporal power over the whole world. Although Sauron knew that men were easier to sway, he sought to bring the elves into his service, as they were far more powerful. By about South Australia 1500, Sauron put on a fair visage and called himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. The Unfinished Tales tells that Anatar assumed the guise of an emissary of the Vala, anticipating the Istari. He befriended the elf-smiths of Eregion including Celebrimbor, a descendant of Fëanor and the greatest living craftsman. Sauron would go on to counsel them in both new forms of metallurgy and magic. Not all the elves trusted him, particularly Lady Galadriel, Elrond, and Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor. Some accounts say that he befriended the elven smiths of Gwaith-i-Myrddin without the knowledge of Galadriel and Celeborn. In one version of the story, Sauron developed such a strong hold over Gwaith-i-Myrddin that he persuaded them to rebel against Galadriel and Celeborn, which drove them to leave Eregion so he could work unopposed. Eventually, Sauron gave the elven smiths he worked with the knowledge and encouragement to forge magic rings, which he infused with potent spells without their knowledge. These included the Great Rings of Power, while he forged the One Ring in secret, to rule the Elvish Rings. Upon that ring Sauron wrote in Tengwar the Black Speech inscription. However, as soon as he put on his ring the elves sensed his treachery, and removed their rings and hid them. Having razed the fortress of Barad-dûr in Mord or in South Australia 1600, Sauron then prepared 90 years for open war. His gathering of armies was opposed by the two powerful enemies behind his back, in the east and south. The elves managed to hide the 3 greatest of the rings from him, but the other 16 rings of power were either captured by Sauron, destroyed, or lost. To the dwarves he had given 7, but to men he had given 9, knowing that they would be the easiest to corrupt. When all had crafted the fathers of the dwarves, he had deliberately made them exceedingly sturdy of both mind and body in order to resist the dark creatures that Morgoth had populated Middle-earth with. This proved to be exceedingly fortunate for the dwarves, for the dwarf lords who received the rings did not fade and could not be influenced by Sauron even while he wore the one ring. However, the dwarves did not escape Sauron's predations unscathed, for the rings kindled in their wielders' hearts insatiable lust for gold, and this obsession by the dwarven rulers would ultimately bring much grief to their race. As Sauron predicted, the 9 men were all corrupted by their rings and became the Nazgûl, Sauron's deadliest servants. Had the elves not recognized Sauron's treachery and forsaken the power of their rings, the results would have been catastrophic. It seems that most of the native men of Middle-earth succumbed to the power of the ring once the Nazgûl were created, and if the elves had been captured in this fashion, they would have become the slaves of Sauron. Thus Celebrimbor's resistance was of immense importance in the history of Middle-earth, having grown greater, effectively, than Morgoth at the end. Sauron conquered nearly all of Middle-earth, with only Gil-galad's realm of Lindon being safe from his grasp. At his height during the Accursed Years, became known as the Dark Lord to the Free Peoples. However, he had not expected the intervention of the Númenóreans, scions of the Edain. The armies of the king of Númenor, Tar-Minastir, defeated Sauron's forces in the Battle of the Gwathlo in South Australia 1700. Beaten but not wholly vanquished, Sauron fled back to Mordor with only his bodyguard and began rebuilding his strength over the next centuries. Towards the end of the Second Age, he was once again powerful enough to raise large armies to attempt to conquer Middle-earth. By this time, he assumed the titles of Lord of the Earth and King of Men, angering the proud kings of Númenor. The last ruler, Earl-Pharazôn, sought to compete with Sauron for the kingship of Arda. After learning that Elendil, whom he especially hated, had survived and was ordering a realm on his borders, Sauron made war on Arnor and Gondor. He struck too soon, however, and had not restored most of his strength, whereas the elven king, Gil-galad, had increased his power in his absence. Therefore, Gil-galad allied with Elendil to create the last alliance of elves and men, and together they marched across Middle-earth to attack Sauron. They defeated his armies in the Battle of Dagorlad, and then invaded Mordor and laid siege to Barad-dûr for 7 years. Finally, Sauron himself came forth and dueled with both Elendil and Gil-galad, slaying them both single-handedly. However, he himself was overthrown in the process. Then Isildur, son of Elendil, took up his father's broken sword, Narsil, and used it to cut the one ring from Sauron's finger. While Sauron's physical body was destroyed, his spirit endured and fled. But his campaign to defeat the Free Peoples had seemingly failed, with his greatest weapon having been taken from him. While Isildur had taken the ring, he could not bring himself to destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom where it was forged, but kept it for himself. He was eventually betrayed by it a few years later, and slain by orcs at the Gladden Fields. The ring fell into the Gladden Fields, and was lost for over 2 millennia. Third Age. Despite this defeat, Sauron still was not vanquished totally. Though greatly weakened, and in non-corporeal form, he still existed due to having poured most of his native power, strength, and will into the One Ring. Thus, as long as the ring remained, so would Sauron, and in the first millennium of the Third Age he lay in hiding, slowly recovering strength until he securely regained some extent of a physical form. In TA 1000, Sauron began to act in the world again, occupying the stronghold of Dol Guldur, the Hill of Sorcery, in southern Mirkwood in TA 1050, and working in secret. There, he used the guise of a dreaded sorcerer, called the Necromancer, and the elves did not yet discern that he was the Dark Lord. Around the same time, the Vala sent 5 Mayor as the Order of Wizards, to rally the free peoples of the world in countering his potential re-emergence. Though Sauron dismissed their presence as a mere effort of defeated imperialists, Gandalf arose among them as his chief enemy. While the Dark Lord continued to scheme and gather strength, the 9 reappeared in TA 1300, and began steadily assaulting the Númenórean kingdoms in exile on his behalf, ultimately destroying the North Kingdom of Arnor and gravely weakening the South Kingdom of Gondor. In the same period, foul things that still walked the earth or beneath it were stirred. The northern orcs of the Misty Mountains grew bolder in their incursions, while secretly raising strongholds and barring the passes between Eriador and the Valas of Anduin. According to the plan of their master in Dol Guldur, the dragons laid waste to the dwarven mansions, consuming 3 of the 7 dwarf rings and claiming the treasure hoards. Guided by the emissaries of the Dark Lord, the Easterlings also renewed their bitter feud with the Gondorians and Northmen, launching fresh attacks on the western lands. Following the sack of Erebor, Gandalf felt that Sauron would take advantage of Middle-earth's weakened state and attack Rivendell and Lothlorien or try regain Angmar. He also feared that Sauron might use Smaug with terrible effect. In TA 2850, Gandalf entered Dol Guldur again and finally discovered that the Necromancer was indeed the Dark Lord. Eventually, the White Council put forth their might and, with Saruman's approval, attacked Dol Guldur in TA 2941, while Sauron and Smaug could not help one another. Without the One Ring in his possession and facing the combined power of the 3 elven rings and skill of the White Wizard, the Dark Lord could draw on only the smallest fraction of his strength, such that his adversaries were able to drive him from the fortress with relative ease. However, having had ample time to prepare, Sauron abandoned Dol Guldur willingly, and returned secretly to Mordor, where he would openly declare himself in TA 2951, and began preparations for his final war to dominate Middle-earth. War of the Ring. Sauron bred immense armies of orcs and enslaved men from the east and south. He gathered his most terrifying servants, the Nazgul, or Ringwraiths, each wearing one of the 9 rings designed for mortal men. He adopted the symbol of a lidless eye, and as he exerted his will over Middle-earth, the Eye of Sauron became a symbol of power and fear. Using the Palantir of Minas Ithil, Sauron communed with Saruman, who held the Orthanc Stone. The Dark Lord soon lured the White Wizard into his service with promises of power, intending to use him as an instrument to subjugate Rohan and form a second pincer to crush Gondor. After Gollum was captured, Sauron had him tortured and learned that he once had a magic ring, and, from him, he heard the words Shire and Baggins. He deduced that Gollum's ring was the One Ring, and in TA 3017 he sent the dreaded Nazgul to find Shire and search for Baggins, so that the One Ring might be found and returned to him. Meanwhile, Saruman, having cheated his master by trying to seize the ring first, intensified his attacks against Theoden in hopes of delivering Rohan to Sauron and regaining favor. The White Wizard was defeated by the Rohirrim and Ents, however, costing the Dark Lord one of his most powerful vassals, as well the large Uruk-hai army. Shortly after Saruman's defeat, Peregrine looked into the Orthanc Stone and accidentally communicated with Sauron, who believed that his treacherous servant had captured either the halflings bearing the ring, or some who might know of it. But shortly thereafter Aragorn took the Palantir and revealed himself to Sauron, and seeing Aragorn, the Dark Lord concluded that his puppet had fallen and that the heir of Isildur possessed the One Ring. Fearing that his enemies would use the ring against him, Sauron sped up his plans and attacked the city of Minas Tirith in Gondor sooner than he had planned, seeking to raise the city and crush the last human resistance to his rule before his enemies could fortify it. And to prevent the men of the West uniting under one king, due to the combined efforts of Gondor, Rohan, and the Dunedain of Arnor, Sauron's army was defeated. Despite still possessing more than enough military strength to destroy Minas Tirith and easily conquer Middle-earth once Gondor fell, doubt began to grow in Sauron. As such, he watched and waited, hoping for a period of strife between Aragorn and other potential ring lords in which he could move out and take the ring for himself. Downfall. Despite their successful repulse of Sauron's armies at Minas Tirith, Gandalf and Aragorn knew that the bulk of Sauron's forces remained in Mordor, readying themselves for another, deadlier strike against the city. Filled as Mordor was with Sauron's troops, Frodo Baggins stood almost no chance of reaching Mount Doom undetected. In light of the situation, Aragorn called for a council consisting of the major commanders of all the forces present in Minas Tirith, and appointed Gandalf to be their commander until the crisis had passed. Gandalf made it clear to all those present that, despite their great victory, they ultimately could not hope to defeat Sauron's armies by force. Therefore, they had two options available. They could station their remaining force, considerably greater than it had been before the battle due to the reinforcements from Rohan and southern Gondor, at Minas Tirith and hope to endure Sauron's next attack. Or, they could take a force to the Black Gate and attempt to challenge Sauron directly. This force, as Gandalf suggested, would only need to be great enough to offer battle, and the rest of their forces could remain behind to garrison Minas Tirith. This option, though suicidal for those involved, would serve to distract Sauron from gazing into his own land, through which the ring-bearer would be traveling. Furthermore, Gandalf theorized that, once Sauron learned that a force too small to pose any real threat to him was on its way to the Black Gate to directly assault Mordor, he would likely believe that the leader of the attacking force would have the One Ring in their possession. Sauron would assume that the ring itself would influence its wielder, who, in his pride and overconfidence in his newfound power, might be foolish enough to challenge Sauron's might with a force too small to assault Mordor in earnest. Their plot worked, as Sauron marshaled most of his remaining forces and marched them towards Udan to crush the men of the West and regain his prize. This action left the plains of Gorgoroth largely unguarded, allowing Frodo and Sam to reach Mount Doom with far less difficulty than otherwise. However, once Frodo reached the cracks of Doom, he finally succumbed to the power of the ring and put it on. Immediately, Sauron became aware of the halfling, and turned his gaze towards the mountain. He frantically sent the ring-wraiths to retrieve the ring, but was too late, as Gollum, after taking the ring from Frodo, slipped and fell to his death into the cracks of Doom. The ring was unmade. The earth shook as a great shock wave rippled across Mordor, and the foundations of Barad-dûr were finally destroyed, causing the great fortress to fall into ruin once and for all. The cone of Mount Doom burst apart in a cataclysmic eruption that consumed the 8 remaining Nazgûl. With his source of power gone, Sauron was utterly defeated and his armies were destroyed or scattered, bereft of the driving will behind their conquest. With the One Ring destroyed, Sauron was permanently robbed of his physical form, reducing him to a malevolent spirit that hovered above Mordor as a huge shape of shadow, impenetrable, lightning-crowned, terrible but impotent, only to be blown away by a great wind. He had ended on the same path as his old master, Morgoth, and was condemned to a sleepless impotent malice that feeds on itself. With the destruction of the ring, the vast majority of Sauron's being in his power was forever lost. With that, Sauron's spirit no longer had the power to create a new body and take shape again. Though his indestructible mind and being were bound forever to Ea, Sauron had lost all power to effect his will upon the world and could never again grow in strength. Before the credits roll, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more movie madness. What did you think of today's video? Let's discuss in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.